You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 207 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here, as always, with Pankaj Bhojwani. This week on the pod, we're talking about Zen. Maybe we're not talking about Zen. I don't know. I'm kind of uncertain on that, what I'm saying, Pankaj.
Lots of uncertainty around his legality, for sure.
Yeah, we're PT London at the time this pod drops, literally a week away, which is insane how quickly it's come around. I know you're flying out as of recording in, less than 48 hours or around 48 hours time you fly out, is that right? Yeah, wow.
I think, 48 hours from now, I'm at the airport.
Yeah, wow. I'm more like 90-ish hours or so. Like I'm a little bit further away, but it is getting nearer and nearer, and yeah, I'm super excited to get out there. And I guess one of the things that maybe we do know is that we're going to be in London and we're going to be watching Pro Tour coverage. We're going to see Aurora. We're going to see Enigma. We're going to see Zen, maybe. That's what we don't know, right?
Yeah, we don't know yet. We might see some Slippy as well because we have some... I guess spoiling the news section a little bit, Slippy did win a PQ Plus recently, so I don't know, maybe that's coming up on some people's radar. The matches against Enigma that were on stream did look quite convincing. Can
I ask though? I didn't ask you this in the pre-show, but when you brought this up to me, but I have a question for you. Or maybe this is even before, I think it was before we got to the pre-show. Actually, it was our pre-discussion. We were just chatting, but Slippy won a PQ Plus, bit of hype there. Jarl won a Battle Hardened. Where's my hype for my guy Jarl winning a Battle Hardened? And showing up in London. If Aurora is the best deck, and the most played deck, I've got a counter for you.
I see Guardian and I fall asleep. I don't know what to tell you. But I think it's maybe more of a... Ooh, Mike just moved out of the way. More of a... The other half of the coin, right? If you're going to bring a deck that's not Aurora or Enigma, it's like, sure, you can be super, quite favored into one of them.
Yeah.
But you also don't want to become a 0% into the other one. And I'd say Slippy isn't 0% into Aurora the way Jarl is 0% into Enigma. So I think maybe that's why the hype was missing.
I have a question for you. If you are at a Pro Tour event and you've got, I don't know, let's say you're going to a Pro Tour or you're at a Pro Tour event, you've got a friend playing and they're like, hey, I'm going to play this deck. It is, let's use Slippy for example. It is maybe, let's say 70%. I honestly think it's that good into Enigma. Maybe a little less, 60, 65, I don't know. Something like that. Percentage is always a little bit arbitrary into that matchup. But you're like, oh, but Aurora is the most played deck and it's X into Aurora. Like, what do you think that is? Like, how unfavored do you think it is into Aurora, for instance?
Ooh, how unfavored it is into Aurora. I haven't practiced it enough. I would say I haven't really seen it play out that much, but I want to say it's not great. 40% is where I'm starting, and I would believe it if it goes lower than that. Okay. For a Slippy.
So if that's gonna be the most played deck,
do you have thoughts?
So would you show up to a Pro Tour with a deck that had a pretty bad matchup into the most played deck? Would you do that?
I wouldn't, but I don't. I think if someone shows up with that, I wouldn't. I'd be like, okay, so you're sort of playing. Yeah, I'd be like, you're sort of playing the gem roulette a little bit. Or maybe they're very confident about their Aurora plan.
Yeah.
I could be off with my numbers over here, of course. I was just guessing 40 odds lower than that. But yeah,
it's interesting, though, because I think, to your point about, do you completely give up a matchup, right? Versus having a chance in a matchup. At the Pro Tour level, I'm like, it's kind of a little bit... at times it feels a little bit arbitrary of I'm have a chance to win this matchup, but it really feels like just a chance. And then I'm like, if I take something like Jarl and I just go to lunch, if I get paired into Enigma, to be fair, I think you can have only a 5 to 10% chance to win that matchup. But I basically just go to lunch. I actually think that gap of difference is always overblown. Of if I just take a bad matchup into the second most played deck, but I have a really good matchup into the first most played deck and maybe another couple of decks. If you just went through and did a bit of you assigned a rating, or you worked up a bit of a calculation of should you or shouldn't you play a deck. Oftentimes that deck that has the better matchup into the first deck even if it's sacrificing fully maybe the second best deck versus having a good matchup into the second most played deck and a bad matchup into the first most played deck, even if it's not as bad. I find that when you sort of do a bit of running of numbers, that actually they're kind of same. Like they're around the same. The point, what it then comes down to afterwards is what do you expect the rest of the meta to be, and how comfortable you like playing those heroes and things like that. Which I just think it often gets decks like Yao get forgotten, where it's like, oh, it's just such a like when there's a really polarizing matchup, like to the point of it's almost unwinnable or unlosable. I think people just dismiss those decks a lot of the time if they're bad into a top 3 deck. But I'll refer back to PT Amsterdam, right? Like people showed up with Enigma at PT Amsterdam.
Yeah, but they didn't. That to me feels like
that's the slippy
a moral lesson. Yeah. It feels like the lesson you take away from that is don't bring Enigma, right? Because then they all do terribly, and there was 0 copies in the top 8, despite there being 4 assassins.
Yeah,
which is supposed to be good for Enigma, quote unquote. So to me, that reinforces that you shouldn't bring the deck that auto loses to the best deck.
Maybe,
which
yeah.
kind of feels like it's counter to what you were saying.
No, I'm just saying people will do it anyway. Like I'm just saying, like I think but then I think the difference is one's Guardian and one's Illusionist, right? And when it's Illusionist, there's a bit of a different precedent. I think there's just different precedents depending on what you talk about. Like people just have this ingrained bias, even if it's unconscious, that they won't acknowledge of like, oh yeah, but it's Enigma, it's so powerful, right? So it's like people will still bring it. Whereas like, oh no, it's Guardian. Like Guardian just isn't. Like you just have this unwinnable matchup. So why would you play it, sort of thing? Or even to your point before, right? You're like talking about Slippy. I'm like, there's the Pankaj assassin bias coming out, you know?
Mm-hmm. I do want to expand a little bit on what you said about, I guess, these probabilities being overblown a little bit, which is specifically, I think people might be too hesitant to bring something that's like 40% into one of the most represented decks. And I think that one is a lot more justifiable because especially, like if you think about Enigma's representation, right? I think we can estimate it to be maybe like less than Aurora, let's say in the 15 to 18%, with 18% probably being a little bit on the higher end. Like maybe 13 to 18%. Like it's in that range, right? Mm-hmm. So if you bring a deck that's like 40% to Enigma, I mean, you also can just sort of roughly do the heuristics where you're probably like it's 8 rounds of CC, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. 8 or is it 9? It might,
9 now, right?
Yeah, it's 9. Yeah, it's 9 rounds of CC. Like there's a decent chance with like that sort of, if it's in the 13 to 18%, you might like at most like face like 2. Like, I mean, there's a decent chance that the average is like 2.
Yeah.
And if you're very confident of everything else, and in these 2 that you're facing, you're still 40% into, that could very well be a good position for you to be in as well. And I think sometimes people forget that. Now, if you're 0% into those 2 times you face Enigma, then that's really bad because you have to win out your draft and win out everything else. You have like no chance in those. Whereas when you're 40%, it's like you can roll that dice and take your equity elsewhere.
It's a good point. Like, and I think that's the way that probably people come down to the end. You know, like now I am being counted to my point, which is like, do you just feel more confident to have a winning chance? I just think at the Pro Tour level, it's like sometimes you're going to pair a matchup, and either because of like variance or because like both players are just so good, one single like piece of luck or variance. Maybe it's the die roll in draft. Maybe it's this element of something that just doesn't line up. Like I just didn't transcend for 5 turns in this Mystic matchup. It's like brilliant. It's going to happen. And pairing into Enigma is going to happen, right? If you're the Yao. So like if you feel so confident in other matchups, like are you okay just to accept that variance piece comes in the gem pairing as opposed to something that might happen in your game? So it's just like, where do you kind of like pin your hopes and dreams, I guess, and what do you want to do? And I like personally, I'm the scenario you explained before of like have the 40% into one of the top 3 decks, often the second most, and then have, or even a 30%er, and have like a really good matchup into decks 1 and 3. Like that's the kind of deck I actually generally like to play. That's the deck I've traditionally played. I've been like, yeah, this is the kind of deck I want to play. I'm going to take my chance of like, okay, I get paired into that once or twice, and I think I'm going to back my skill enough and my having prepped for that matchup enough that I'll win maybe one of them, and then I will also just be so good in my other games that it'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a very, very okay. But actually, not just okay. I think that's a very strong position to be in.
Me too. It's my favorite position to be in. And also, I feel like I'm really like making a choice at that point because I also hate playing the most played / the default aggro deck of the format. And if they're one and the same, I definitely hate that.
I always like playing the deck that targets the best deck, and I will take like a lower percentage into like the second most deck. But I definitely don't like being on the most played deck for sure. Because typically that is the aggro deck, and I don't really like to play that anymore.
Yeah. Where I don't like to be, though, is the deck that beats the answer to the format, right? So if the question is, for instance, Aurora in this case, and then the answer is, I don't know, playing more Aurora or Jarl, or
no answer.
Apparently if you're Pankaj it might be Zen, then I don't like to play the deck that beats that. Like, I have no interest in playing that deck. I don't think that's ever a good choice, honestly. I feel like that you just trap yourself into having the worst like a bad matchup into the most played deck, and I don't think that's ever a good place to be.
That is only the correct call if your deck that beats the deck is also beating the most played deck, which is, I mean, the thing that sticks out is PT Amsterdam, right?
And that's
Uzuri
what I was going to say.
Uzuri's beating Zen and beating the deck that beats Zen, which was new. So that was a solid pick. But yeah, to your point, every other time that has not been the case, because you are taking a losing matchup into the most represented deck. You're beating the deck that beats deck A, but you're losing to deck A, and that's not good.
Well, that's what I was going to reference just to maybe help my point, because I was Team Hayden, and then I was kind of coming across to Team Pankaj of like, yeah, but I'm going to play both sides of the coin here and agree with you on some of this. But what I will say is, you use Pro Tour Amsterdam as that's why you shouldn't bring Enigma, right? Like in that format of like, don't bring. Like, I think we compared it to Jarl almost, right? Like, but Enigma had a bad matchup into the most played deck. It was the level 3 deck. It was there to target the news that were trying to target Zen, right? That's why people played it. But in this case, Jarl would be targeting the most played deck, right? Not potentially the second most played deck, which may not be Enigma. Like, I think there's no conversation as to whether Aurora is the most played deck for Pro Tour London. Like, I think just you can double down, put the house on it, whatever. But the second most played deck, that is actually really interesting. And I think, if you wanted to take a gamble on, let's just say, Enigma being somewhere between 10% and 20% played, there's some bets to be had within that range, I think.
Who else is in that conversation to you? Like, Zen and New-ish, but I think Enigma is better positioned than both of them. Like, I think as time goes on, people are falling lower and lower on New, I think.
I agree.
If I'm reading the room correctly, and I think it should be the case, but Zen and Enigma seem to be like the other contention for like second most represented deck, and I could see either of them being up there with, I would give Enigma the slight edge, but I'm still, I'm not as low on Zen as you are, it seems.
Well, I think second most played might be a little bit of a, it might mislead in some ways, because I think the second most deck is going to be significantly less played than, like, for instance, the gap between the fifth most played deck and the second most played deck, I think is going to be closer than the second and the first most played deck. Like, I'd be very confident that that's true. Definitely the fourth most. Honestly, I think the fifth most, because I think traditionally the fifth most played deck is somewhere around like 7 or 8%, and I think the second most played deck might be around like 12 to 13%. Whereas I think the most played deck, honestly, I know I said it last week, Pankaj, I was like, I'm like in the high 20s. I'm firmly in the high 20s. Like, I would even potentially put a 3 in front of it. Like, I'm getting that close to it. Which might be a bit wild. But so I think, the second most played deck I guess it's just less, it's not maybe quite as interesting in terms of like, it's more about what's the second, third, fourth most played deck and the spread of them. But what I will say, the heroes I would add there that we've been talking about would be the new. There'd be Syndra. Like, if you just look at open events, and I agree, once you get to the Pro Tour level and closed events, it's different. People coalesce more on learnings and team environments, and I think Syndra is going to drop way off where it's been in open events. I think the one deck that we've spoken about a few times, and it's had success, is Florian. Like, where is Florian in this conversation? Like, I think Florian is firmly in those top 5 most played decks. But the thing is like, a few teams making decisions could swing Florian from being like 5th most played to 3rd most played, maybe even 2nd most played pretty easily, because that gap between decks 2, 5, maybe even as low as 6 is going to be really narrow at this event, I think, because Aurora is just honestly I think it's so warping right now.
Florian seems to be like the less polarized Jarl, where you're not as favored into Aurora as Jarl is, and you're not as unfavored into Enigma as Jarl is. So you're kind of just like in the middle a little bit, which could be the spot that we were talking about just now, actually, where you're like slightly favored into the most played deck, but then you're slightly unfavored into the second most played deck, and that's probably a fine place to be. I don't know. I find that deck a combination of boring and just kind of like, it's fine.
That's why I think it could be the second most played deck though. Like, teams could just land on it. Like, honestly, I think teams could just land on it because it does the thing you just spoke about. But it wouldn't take much for it to be the second or the 5th most played deck.
to your point about Aurora's representation, I think, we had the conversation last week about where I expect it to be. I haven't really changed from my 18 to 23%, but I will add an asterisk. If Zen LLs, then I'll be in the high 20s with you.
Okay.
If Zen doesn't LL, I'm sticking to my prediction of 18 to 23. But we do have that as our main topic to talk about.
Yeah, we can get into that. Let's take a beat and we can talk about this week in Flesh and Blood, maybe.
Yeah, let's do that. So my week has been a couple more drafts and a whole lot more CC spectating and practice. Just more of the same as in the past few weeks. The testing team is playing every day, either getting drafts in or playing CC, and it's been a heck of a time.
Yeah, nice. What have you, I guess, investigated any of the fringe CC decks, just in case you get sprung? I guess it sounds like you've been investigating Slippy a little bit, at least watching some games.
We actually didn't. Well, at least I didn't. After the finals happened and we saw Slippy win convincingly, there's been some buzz and we're like, oh, we should try this. But some of us have been coping. We go through a cycle. And we're definitely coping a little bit on Verdance again, and that's just happening right now. Okay, I don't know what to say. It's happening, but yeah. Aside from that, it's just been what you would expect, the meta stuff, and how the meta stuff is reacting to the other meta stuff.
I think we're gonna go back to more meta stuff in the main topic, so I might save my questions. I got a couple of questions, but I think they're relative to maybe Zen and meta observations. So I'll talk about my week in Flesh and Blood. I've not been able to play as much as I would have liked, but been able to spectate. I did have a really good day on Sunday. Went and spent some time with a friend of the pod, Nick Butcher, Tom Dowling, and his friend Alex, and we got a bunch of games in on Sunday, which is great. And I think this is like I went with the mentality of, okay, be the testing partner, right? Like be in there, but also come out of that Sunday of like, where would my head be right now? Like what deck would I be most likely to play in London? And then also treat this week of like, yes, I'm spending a lot of time with draft this week. I really want to make sure I'm really comfortable with draft before we get there. And also any of the kind of fringe decks I haven't seen, but I feel like I did that in the prior week, and I feel like I'm pretty across a lot of the key matchups and things now. So I was like, okay, start to think like, what if I was playing this event? Like, what deck would I play? And I came out of the weekend pretty confident of like what I would, or at least the last 2 days of what I would play at London now.
Well, you can't just drop that and then not tell us the deck. Actually, I have an answer for that too, but I do have an asterisk on my answer in terms of how much more prep I would have liked on this deck. But
let's leave it till the end of the pod. Let's leave it till the end of the pod.
Okay.
Hey, if you don't listen to all of our podcasts, screw you. Like, I don't know. Like, or skip to the end. I don't know. I don't care. Do whatever you want.
No skippy. No skipping forward. Let's move on to the news. So, some Arsenal Pass news. A new replay analysis video is out. The replay analysis with the Pro Series that we started last month. This month's episode, well, I guess March's episode, was with Peter Budensic, who walked us through his Calling Sao Paulo game on Vincent. So lots of interesting and great insight from him. Definitely go check that out. And also do give him a follow on Mask of Momentum on Twitter and on YouTube as well. Other than that, we had Battlehard in Milwaukee, which was a Team CC event this past weekend. It was won by the fearsome and menacing Team Cuddly Koalas, which consisted of Shane Martin on Aurora, Naib Movesir on Zen, and Jonathan Fook on Verdant. So big congrats to them for taking down Battlehard and giving 25 LL points to all three of those heroes. Well, each of those heroes, which is why Zen is in the Unzentainty state that he is right now, which we'll get more into in the main topic. The PQ Plus the next day at that event was won by Luke Magnuson on Arachne Slip Through the Cracks, which was a very, very interesting choice and something that I don't want to say it like shook up the meta or like shook up some people, but it's caused a little bit of buzz, I would say. So that's very, very exciting. And after that weekend, a bit of an LL point update here. Zen is at 991 LL points. And there are 2 CC Battlehardens coming up this weekend. So if he wins either one of those 2, he will LL and not be legal for London. Now note, there are PQ pluses attached to this Battlehardens as well, but only one of them is CC. And the PQ Plus only gives 5 LL points. So it doesn't matter whether he wins a PQ Plus or not. All that matters is whether he wins one of the 2 CC Battlehardens for him to LL.
Yep. Yeah, wow. I mean, I think all eyes are going to be in these Battlehardens this weekend, which is... where are they? Is one Jakarta? Is that right?
One is Jakarta, and I don't remember the other one. And I'm not sure if either is being streamed, actually. Because I'm pretty sure Mansan's taking a bit of a break. He's had a busy past few weekends with like calling Kobe, then calling Sao Paulo, and then Battle Hard in Milwaukee. I think this is his like a bit of a break week before PT London. So I'm not sure if it's being streamed or who is streaming it, if it is.
Yeah, wow. I mean, this is super interesting. This is crazy. I mean, also shout out to Battle Hard in Milwaukee. I mean, first of all, I don't see any Australians on that team, so Team Cuddly Koalas might be a little bit misleading. And also, shout out to Shane and Nabe for just carrying that team, because someone was playing Verdance, and I can't imagine they won many games. But I'm kidding.
The coverage games did not look good for the Verdance.
No, I know. I saw two of them, and I was like.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, this is what I expect would happen. So anyway,
so funny. No, super interesting about the. I mean, we're going to talk more about Zen, but just the fact that it's of these battle hardens holding such a weight, and I guess battle hardens that they're not. I'm just trying to check where the second one is. So I definitely know one's Jakarta. And I'm trying to think what Indonesia often has kind of an odd meta, but they are pretty high on as Dublin, actually. So there'll probably be some players who are playing at Pro Tour London and Dublin, I imagine, just given it's just over the water there, over the channel. So I don't know. Like, honestly, this could be so interesting.
I mean, Dublin also seems like the perfect spot to like go there before you go to PT London, right? For people who are traveling to London, like so that happens a lot every pro tour. I mean, even for like Lille, right? Like you were part of the crowd that came to Singapore for calling Singapore on the way to Lille, which is happening like a weekend or two after calling Singapore. So yeah, Battlehard in Dublin might have some real killers out there.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe the current Irish national champion won with Zen. I mean, there's no way you know that, Pankaj, but I have a feeling that maybe that's true. So, maybe it was new. I don't know. It was a Mystic Hero, I'm pretty sure. That seems like a safe bet to say. Now I'm just second guessing whether I actually knew this or I've just made it up. I guess we'll find out. If you know, I have a feeling like Dylan won again. If people are familiar with the Irish flesh and blood scene, but. Anyway.
Yeah, let us know in the comments if you know the answer to that.
Right, let's get into the Commander Cookout. We have a great question which came through from the podcast last week, which was left on our YouTube comments. If you do want to leave a Commander Cookout question, please do so. Get those in. You can do exactly what Dark Shield has done on YouTube. Drop a comment in this podcast below. Let us know it is a Commander Cookout question. You can email us, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can head over to the Arsenal Pass Discord if you are a patron and drop it in the channel there. Or you can, come by and see us. Swing by and say, hello, Governor, at PT London and drop us a note. The question this week, Command Cookout question. How do you guys test a new deck? How many reps go into it, and how does it usually evolve over time?
So for me, it usually starts with just trying that deck into the most represented deck currently. So the one that sticks out to me, the testing session that sticks out to me the most when I read this question was when we were brewing MST heroes, when MST first dropped, we were just running all of them into KO. KO was like our punching bag to be like, okay, how does this deck work? KO is like just the nice de facto, like he's like a good numbers deck, but isn't interacting with you too much. So it's very, very good to like run into as like a new brew. So he was like our litmus test kind of thing. Where it was like, oh, if Zen doesn't beat KO, why would you ever play Zen? That kind of stuff. So most represented deck currently is what I would start with when I'm brewing. And then as the meta evolves and we start seeing other builds of the same hero, then we adjust accordingly. Like KO fell off and then Zen became stronger. So then when I'm brewing new, I start teching for Zen more rather than teching for KO, for example. So that's kind of how it evolves over time. And in terms of reps, I'd say that varies a lot based on whether the hero we were brewing is viable, right? So for example, in the case of Verdance, it was very clear very quickly that after she dropped that she's just not playable. So that was like 10 games. Like, okay, the first few games, okay, it was just a totally new brew. Okay, this is strong. Okay, let's try and do more of this. Okay, this is doing this. And then, it just dies to like everything. It's just not good enough. And then it was dropped very quickly. Whereas new, she came out, I'm brewing her. I'm like, wait, she's actually strong. Oh, she's actually doing all this good stuff. And then she becomes a deck of the season, like for me. And then it's like, then that's like infinite reps, right? So it really varies depending on the strength of the hero and the position of the hero in that meta.
Yep. I mean, I would echo that a lot. I mean, the things I would say about, first of all, how to test a new deck. I think you want a benchmark. So, I think that you can have two different benchmarks. So, depending on where you are in maybe the life cycle of a meta, if it's really early on, I think the easiest way is to take the best numbers deck to what you said, right? So, for instance, in that meta, it might have been KO. If it's not the most played, it might not always be that you test into the most played deck, because the most played deck might be a more like a less linear deck, and might be something that is a bit more around how the matchup's played. So, for instance, I mean, honestly, I don't think Enigma is actually that because of the way it's played. But say it was like CYB Enigma, it's like, well, that's a little bit more around like the kind of play style as opposed to just like a numbers deck that's going to deal you damage and things like that. So I would, or even like when Ultim was in the format, like unless I was crafting like maybe an aggressive deck, like I wouldn't always start with the Ultim. I might start with like maybe the Viserai or the Briar, like whatever the aggressive deck is, the numbers deck. But it depends on your goal. If your goal is to come into a new meta that's really untested and unknown, you just want to figure out like how good is this hero, like how good is like some of these combinations of cards and what this hero can do. So testing its numbers is great, because if you test into a deck that's a bit more targeted and maybe has a lot more disruption and things like that, like you might not actually test the hero so much as you might test like, oh, how good is a certain strategy, and that might lead you down the wrong path. Whereas later in a meta where it's more developed, you might specifically want to target a hero. So let's say it's CYB Enigma or it's the Ultim. And so instead of starting with just like, oh, is this hero good? And does this hero do the things I want to? You start with, I have a very specific game plan I'm trying to enact, or a very specific thing I'm trying to get out of a deck that I've brewed up. And so you would start with just like, what is that best deck, regardless if it's the numbers deck, if it's that, etc. And then you might move to, okay, cool, it does the thing I want to into this strategy. Like, I can beat the CYB deck. Now, can I beat the numbers deck? Can I beat the Dash.io or the Aurora? Like, how does that look to me? So that's kind of what it looks like for me personally. And then like reps, I would say the same. Like I would say to find out the answer to those questions that I just spoke about, those questions, those layer 1, layer 2 questions of, can I beat the numbers, can I beat the best thing in the format? If it's an established format, honestly, I'm giving like, I don't know, somewhere between like half a dozen to max a dozen reps to answer those questions, maybe tweaks in between. If it's a newer hero with a lot more unknown, yeah, maybe a lot more, especially if I feel like within the first 4 to 5 games, I'm like, yeah, there's something here. There's like a power to this. I can't quite work out the right combinations of cards. It doesn't quite feel, something isn't right. Like I'll take like Ultim and Briar as an example. Like, I mean, when those two heroes came out, like, man, these heroes feel super powerful, but I just can't quite get the right combinations of how this should look or how this should feel. So I spent a lot of time with that. Whereas, like, I played a couple of games with Lexi when it first came out, mind you, and I was like, nah, this ain't it. Like, this just isn't it. I'm going to put this down pretty quickly. Same thing, I think, with like Rosetta coming out. Like, I played a few games in all the heroes, and I was like, yeah, nah, I'm not ready to put in and dedicate this time to any of them. I spent a little bit more time with Aurora and Florian, but eventually both I was like, nah, I've got to about 7 or 8 games here. I'm out.
I mean, I think Aurora was still strong when Rosetta dropped, but you have definitely heard my thoughts on that matter. On that matter. I do want to echo what you said about, I did say most represented deck, like I would test into most represented deck, but you bring up a very good point that that's actually not the relevant part. It just so happens to be that almost every time the most represented deck has been the numbers deck, but correct. That is the point. That is the point of significance. It's not that they're most represented, but that they are just doing the numbers thing. And so when you are trying a new hero or a new strategy, like that's a very good benchmark, as you point out. Like KO, in my opinion, was a very, very good punching bag sort of thing to like test your new strategy into. Fi is another one that comes to mind, where it's just like, you play into the Fi, you play into the KO, and be like, okay, can you beat these things? These are like the most vanilla. They're just sending numbers at you, not disrupting you too much. They have some power. They're doing powerful things, but they aren't, messing with your game plan or asking you to play in a very different way. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I wouldn't, in my very early brews, test into like a Nu, for example, because a Nu is just trying to mess me up the entire time. I wouldn't test into an Illusionist. I wouldn't test into like a regular Enigma or like a Prism as like the first time. Like when Gravy Bones comes out, I'm gonna be like, hey people, give me reps into like play a KO or play a Fi into my Gravy Bones and let me see what this guy does before I start being like, okay, how does this beat Nu? How does this beat Enigma? How does it beat like Prism? That's all more like, okay, you need to carve out a different strategy or like a unique angle, but the point of running into the numbers deck or the most represented deck, as it is usually, is just to find out what your core strategy and game plan is and what your powerful combinations of cards are.
I might play into Enigma because I think currently Enigmas look more like value mid-range decks. Like they play defense reactions, they play attacks. But I agree. Like Prism, for instance, like back in the day, like that's not where I would start, right? Just personally,
I agree. Enigmas do look that way these days, but I still think a big part of every hero's game plan when they're facing against Enigma is knowing what to do when they block with Traverse. Like knowing what your answer is to the Traverse turn.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's not something I expect to have on like the day one brew of a deck. Like, for new, it's like you never pop your boots until they block with Traverse. And like Aurora these days, like they don't pop their snaps until like Traverse is blocked with. And sometimes if you have an equipment piece that is similar, then you could just default to that. Be like, hey, my equipment piece matches a Traverse. But if your hero doesn't have that, then you need to figure out what your answer to that Traverse block is, or the mirror guy after Traverse block. Which to me puts it a little bit more in the complicated category, which is why I wouldn't. But I could see your point about the builds of Enigma these days being very value-oriented.
I think the other, I guess one thing I would say, and I think this is a piece of advice off the back of that, is that personally, I'm not actually caring about if I'm winning or losing these games. Just to kind of riff on that, right? Like, I think, maybe I don't have an answer to that specific situation, but I'm going to feel like, how was the game going beforehand? Like, to that point. And I get it's like, maybe that's just not the best benchmark anyway then, but I think that's kind of something for me as well. It's like, I might be losing all the games, but like, how does it feel? Like, does it feel like there's power there? Am I having powerful turns? Does it feel like something's just not quite clicking? And how am I interacting with these numbers? What are my numbers? Like, those are the things I'm more interested in, rather than am I winning or losing against refined best decks in the format. Like, that's, like, I'm expecting I'm going to lose a lot of games. And if I'm not, then this hero might be broken. I will say the other thing as well is the reason I might not test against something like Enigma is it might not be relevant. And I think that's something to keep in mind as well, is like, if you're testing for, let's say, your Gravy Bones for... maybe as cards start to come out and things like that, when we start to see cards, and Enigma sitting pretty close to Living Legend, is it worth even testing into that? Right now, if I'm like, I'm going to start testing for ProQuest Singapore, I'll tell you what, I'm not starting with Zen as the deck I'm running things into right now, because it's very likely that it's not relevant between the events happening before and with London and the first week of ProQuest season.
That's so funny that you say that, and yet you're so low on him. You think he can't win anything, but you also think he's going to LL by PQ season? I don't know about that.
I didn't say he can't win anything. I just don't think that he is that good. I think he's fine. I just find Zen so frustrating every time I play it. But anyway,
I find him frustrating to play with and against. I do agree with you on that, and I have mentioned before as well. It just feels like so much of it is like, okay, when does he see the transcend, which feels very out of your control to some extent. But I will say, I do think more and more heroes are sort of following that mold, right? You play the Aurora Mirror or something, and it's like, okay, who saw the CLV first? And it's just like, okay, kind of comes down to that. It does feel like there is more of that going around these days.
Just very steadfast that I think Zen just doesn't have that same power level. I just think it just isn't. Anyway, we've discussed. I'm not trying to rehash it, but I just think the fact you have to play defense reactions, like actively play defense reactions to have game in these matchups, I'm just like, it's just not what I want to be doing. It's just the draws.
His ceiling is very much just chase the tail, which I definitely do agree with.
Certainly is. That card is insane though. All right, great question. I love these kind of questions. I think I really like getting into the brew house. Early doors, testing, working out what's good, targeting a meta is one of my favorite things to do. And so, when it comes to testing new decks and getting reps in, I think it's, I guess the last part was like, how does that usually evolve over time? I think the way things evolve over time for me is, I'd say one big thing is honestly like knowing when to get out on things, like on testing things. Like that's one of the evolutions over time of like, like we've gone through evolutions, the deck has kind of changed, continued. Like you should be more and more like, once you understand the base power level of a deck, especially if it's a new format, then you start to iterate and work on things and start to work out your match. So for instance, you might not start with Enigma, but you might very quickly get there once you've got a good base handle on the deck. And now it's like, okay, now let's start to work into the meta now that we know that it's quote unquote got legs. But then just also knowing when to get out on things that aren't either the right time. Like for instance, let's take Lexi when it first came out, or I'm gonna say it, Pankaj, Aurora when it first came out, and you had like decks like Dash IO and stuff, like knowing when to maybe get out a little bit and spend more time on other heroes.
it's so strange people say that when Aurora did make second at Worlds.
Yeah.
So, I don't get why everyone keeps saying like Aurora's only good now when she was literally finalist at Worlds Osaka when Enigma won.
It just wasn't as powerful.
About that. I think
it just wasn't as powerful. And you had... I'm not saying it wasn't like playable. I'm just,
Anyway, but to your point, there is also a factor of when to get back in, which is funny, which I think, to be honest, the when to get back in is usually very, very obvious. I think the one that sticks out to me is Zen. I think when Zen first came out, definitely the first couple of weeks, people were like, wait, what's going on? Because they were trying, like, head leads the tail, roar of the tiger type stuff, right? They rid Tiger on the hero and they did that. And then it turns out that wasn't very good. And then Pudding shows us his Bond Zen list, and then everyone's like, oh, wait, this deck is broken, and you get right back in. But yeah, typically the idea of when to get in is quite clear, because you see someone else do something insane with it. But I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not... I don't know if it's always clear. Like, I think on these big decks it is, but sometimes there's times where it's like, actually, there's a good medical, and I think we've seen this from time to time of like, oh, this is actually a really good... Like... when was the right time to get back in on Azuri, for instance? Because Azuri kind of like was floating around like the Droma meta and stuff like that, and it's like, oh, actually, the right time turns out to be Pro Tour Amsterdam, for instance, right? Like there is these times to get back in on things that may not be super obvious. I honestly, like, I would say personally from my experience, I felt like getting back in on Inventor Extraordinaire for national season was like a good time to get back in on that hero with where the meta was at. So I don't know. There will be some times where it's like, there would be very obvious times and people will lead the way. And then there'll be some unobvious times where you can actually potentially spike an event. But people, I would say, more often fail trying to do that than succeed. That's for sure.
Yep. Speaking of getting back in, I'm hearing it's a good time to get back into Kano. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Time for the main topic of the show. Pankaj, take us away.
All right, so main topic of the show. We don't know about Zen's legality for PT London. And so before, we have sort of two subtopics here. The second one is more around the meta, the shifts of Zen LLs, or his place in the current meta even. That is subtopic 2. Before we get to that, I want to talk about subtopic 1, which is a bit more of a general, almost philosophical conversation around this situation that we're in right now, which is we have a Tier 4 event coming up. 1 weekend from now, like 1 week. 1 week from now, we are like looking over PT games, we're watching PT coverage, we're casting it, and we don't know the PT format in a sense, right? We literally don't know whether Zen is legal. And I just wanted to get a conversation going about how we feel about this. Like, this was a potential repercussion about the LL system change that they made. It's been a while now. I think it's been about a year now, where they do weekly LL point check-ins and LL heroes on a weekly basis rather than what it used to be, which is every BNR announcement, right? And that's brought us to this position where there's a Tier 4 event coming up and we don't know whether Zen is legal. People don't know whether they should prepare against Zen. People don't know whether they can bring Zen. And yeah, I just want to start with that. How do we feel about that situation?
It's not the first time it's happened, I think, which is something that's probably people may or may not know, depending on how long you've been playing Flesh and Blood, is that, yes, a week out is a bit unprecedented, I would say, in that, but 2 weeks out is not unprecedented. So in the lead up to Pro Tour 1, we had a ban and suspended announcement or restricted announcement just a couple of weeks before. And we've had this at a few Tier 4 events where we've had a ban announcement within a month of the event, which is quite close, and I remember when the first couple of times it happened, it definitely caused a lot of conversation and I think challenges of like, is this going to, how do we feel if you've booked in it, you've booked for this event, you've booked your flights, you've booked your hotels, and all of a sudden like the deck you plan to play is no longer either legal or viable. I think my comparison to that is I'm glad that they made the change to not have ban and suspended announcements so close, where honestly so many things could change, for instance. But the Living Legend thing does cause some challenges. I'm interested whether... maybe I'll leave it at that for now. I think Zen is maybe not as big an impact as another hero could be, for instance, but I think it still matters.
I'm very glad you brought up PT1 because I was going to bring that up too. And I'm going to be a little more blunt. It wasn't just that ban and restricted announcement caused a bunch of conversation around it. I think it straight up sparked a lot of criticism.
It did.
And I was one of those people criticizing LSS for making a big shakeup to the format a few weeks before the PT. I remember being very upset because I had Viscerai prepared and then I had to pivot to something else like last minute, like when my flights and hotels and everything were booked already.
Wait, why can you play
My
Viscerai?
point is, because Skeletor got banned?
Was that before PT1? Oh, it was before PT1. You're right. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it was before Leo. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, it was before PT1. But my point is, so in those moments when it's happened, where the BNRs happened very shortly before Tier 4 event, a lot of criticism has been directed towards LSS for that decision. Is this, what I want to talk about is a situation like this in many ways similar to those spots, where if Zen does LL a week before the PT, is this, are we in a similar situation, or is this different because this is something that is a lot more visible in a sense? There's a lot more.
Yeah. No, in
you
fact,
could have expected this a lot more than you could have expected a random, like a BNR touching something you weren't expecting, right? This is like the leaderboard is public. They ban on a weekly basis now. You could have prepared for this. So does this lie on the criticism side of it, or does it side on the nope, you should have been prepared?
It's going to feel different for each person, I think, because for some people it's going to feel basically the same. And it's probably going to be. I'll backtrack a little bit. We're now through many years now, coming on to towards the fifth year of, or at least the fourth year anyway, of Tier 4 events in Flesh and Blood, right? And I think people are more experienced. You have more at Pro Tour 1. No one was a seasoned Pro Tour player, a Flesh and Blood Pro Tour player, right? They might have played in other competitive games, but no one was a seasoned Flesh and Blood Pro Tour player. Now people are, and people are used to this kind of. You've got to, potentially prepare for a few different eventualities. People are used to testing down to the wire and not having decks locked in because honestly, that's just the nature of Flesh and Blood. Of like a lot of information comes late, and I think so. You've got people who are just maybe a little bit more. People are thinking about access to cards. It's a little bit more. People have gone through that experience before, so I think that kind of either way, even if this is a ban and suspend announcement as opposed to an impending LL, I think that impact would feel a lot less than it did at PT1. Just wanted to maybe start with that. But I think for some people it's going to feel the same because I think, maybe you're heading there for the calling. Maybe this is your first Pro Tour and you are a Zen player and that's your thing. And you're like, I don't even know if I can play my deck heading to this Pro Tour. Like that feels really bad, right? So I think for a certain percentage of people, it's going to feel basically the same. So I think there's a little bit of overlap, but I think the majority, it's quite a different thing. And I think to your point about visibility of the Living Legends leaderboard, the fact that Zen's been on this trajectory for a very long time. Maybe that's the other thing is like at one point it looked like Zen was going to be Living Legend a very long time ago, and then it hasn't eventuated, right? And I will say the last thing, now I will make this point, is that I think the impact of, given the fact that Aurora, best deck in the format, Zen's spot in the format is up for contention as to how good it is. I think regardless of even if it's legal, I think it's going to be somewhere around that, like we said, maybe 8 to 15% mark. Its impact isn't as big as, let's say, PT1, when it was like, is Starvo literally going to be legal for this event? And it ended up being 36% of the meta, right? So I think that's probably where my head's at.
Yeah, I definitely agree about his point in the meta being sort of contentious, and actually that when we get into like subtopic 2, which is the projected meta shifts and stuff, I think that'll be a great thing to discuss. But I kind of want to bring us back to, I don't want to focus too much on because it's specifically Zen,
sure.
maybe it's not that bad that something is LLing a week, that a shift is happening a week before. Let's shift up. Let's say it's Enigma. Let's say Enigma was this close to LLing a week before the PT. How would you feel about that? Is I guess where I want to come at this topic from, which is the more general idea that there could potentially be a massive shift happening a week before the PT. In this case, we're a little bit fortunate that it's a hero like Zen and potentially won't shake up things as much. But if it was the case, because it could very well easily have been Enigma, right?
Yep.
She's not like that far off in a sense. How would we feel about that? Like, should something be done about this to prevent this in the future? Like maybe like a lock-in date for like the LL leaderboard, like a few weeks before a Tier 4 event? Or do we feel like, hey, it's very visible and we expect pro players, like as to your point, as you were saying earlier, we expect our pro players to be prepared for these different eventualities?
Yes. I think like, I just, yeah. I think it actually would be super exciting for that to happen. I think, yes, it's really hard to divorce like the Zen piece from this right now because it's happening with Zen. So you can't not look through that lens, right? Because this is the first time this has happened. Like we're a week out from an event, and a hero may or may not be legal for the tier 4 event. So it's hard not to put the Zen lens on it, so to speak, right now. But if I'm trying to divorce that a little bit, and I put Enigma in that spot or Aurora in that spot, like let's put Aurora in that spot, right? Like that would be crazy, right? Potentially the most played deck, potentially up to what may be, somewhere between 18 and 35% of the meta, depending on who you ask right now, could just not be a playable deck, like not be a legal hero at the event. That would have an insane impact. And I think that would obviously have some implications of like, this feels so bad preparing for this event. How did you prepare for this eventuality? But at the same time, and this may be a bit controversial, I feel like most people won't agree with this, but I feel like if it's flesh and blood at the highest level and people are preparing for this event and the best players in the world, I think that's kind of exciting. Like I would hate for it to happen all the time, but if that happened once, that would be kind of cool. I don't know. That's how I feel. And not obviously not everyone playing that event is going to feel that way for sure. People don't have infinite. I like if I was preparing for that event, I would feel a little bit anxious about it, like having to prepare for 2 eventualities. I mean, I've done it before. I literally did that for PT1, prepared for multiple eventualities up until 2 weeks before, and it's hard. It's time consuming. It's not easy. But I think like from a and maybe it's because I'm in the booth for this one and not playing, but like I think from a viewer standpoint, from what that means for the impending ProQuest season afterwards, like it would be pretty insanely exciting, I think.
We are on different sides of this argument. I think I don't like it. And as someone who's on the coverage side of things, I do agree. I think it would make coverage better. But I think for me I think it takes a hit to the tournament integrity. We're lucky that it's Zen and it's not a gatekeeper in any way and isn't like going to cause a massive like tectonic shift in the meta. But if it was, I would be quite unhappy.
Why does it take a hit to the integrity of the event, though? What's it doing with the integrity of the event?
Okay, maybe integrity is too strong.
I was like, that's a really strong word.
It's too strong of a term. Okay, I'll take that back. I'll walk that back. But what I want to get at is that to me, tier 4 events are where we see the most refined game plans and the most like what's the term? Like the most prepared players duke it out against each other. And So I guess not integrity, but I think it takes away from the high levelness of gameplay that I come to expect from a tier 4 event, and what I really enjoy of these tier 4 events is getting down to the absolute nitty gritty.
The technical.
It takes away from that and puts it more into the realm of like the calling that happens a weekend after the new set release. It puts it a little bit more in that realm rather than this is a tier 4 event. These are people who have been preparing for this for like months in a testing team where everyone else is as good as they are, and they've come up with these strategies, and when we're seeing unique things come out, like we're seeing CYB news suddenly come out and it's been like internal and they've been playing it in this meta as we expect it to be. I think it takes away from that, which is what I really enjoy from a tier 4 event.
I think that's a fair criticism. I think the counter to that is I would say it opens it up to showing how the best players in the world react to new information and process new information and find angles of attack. Like personally, I'm really big on finding the deck for the tournament, finding the perspective, and often you do a lot of that in the last like 2 to 3 weeks. You don't do a lot of that in the 4 to 7 weeks beforehand, I would say. So I mean I do resonate with that as well. I think that's very true, and I think you give a more even playing field to the total population of the event if you have a longer lead time to do those things, as opposed to things changing a week before. People are traveling, people who are already there are going to have a bigger benefit, for instance, all these things, right? But I do think there is this piece of like, I also get to see the best players in the world show up and show how they're going to react, how they're going to pick decks, how they're going to test efficiently with the couple of days they have to do so as well. So I think there's a bit of a balance to it, but I do agree with you. I think there is. So I would hate to see it happen multiple times. I would hate to see it happen consistently. But yeah, I don't know. One time, I'm here for it.
The traveling aspect you brought up is like the other part of it, right? We sort of alluded to it, but I remember PT1. I remember being quite like very, very distraught that such a like my deck was absolutely completely unplayable. With also, I mean, that one was different because there was no lead, there was no expectation even. Like we could theorize, oh, maybe they'll hit this or maybe they'll hit this. But so that one was like even worse. But I just remember reflecting, being that as a player, I don't like that. I bought my flights and booked my hotels for some, and then I was going into it with a certain expectation, and it was like the rug got pulled under me, right? And I didn't like that feeling, especially when it's that high level of an event.
I do think that's different, though. I do genuinely think there is a sizable difference between not have this big level of uncertainty. What I will say, though, is I think where that Living Legend piece could impact your pro level players at the tier 4 event, I actually think that's not the biggest impact. The biggest impact is the people who are planning to travel for the callings and these other events part of the weekend. I think that's where you potentially could impact a big chunk of people and have a really bad feel. Like it's going to be you can't avoid it. I think that you're going to, if you have the system and you do it this way and you don't have a lock-in date, like you say, there's going to be some bad feeling if Zen does Living Legend, right, at the Pro Tour level. Like there's going to be a couple of players at Pro Tour like, I was logged on Zen, I felt like I had the angle to win this event or to do really well in this event because I thought Zen was really well positioned or whatever, right? But I think what you're going to impact more than that tier 4 is the tier 3 and tier 2. Like that's where I think you potentially impact it more. If people are like, I've like rocked up to the calling, I've got my Zen deck, and I was prepared to go here, and all of a sudden it's like, I wouldn't be surprised. Like if you said this to me, hey Hayden, I just heard that, you know, for the calling we're expected 1,000 people, and apparently like 50 of them are going to play Zen, and 25 of them have now decided to not play the event because it's a calling. I'd be like, yeah, I believe that, and that sucks. So I do think that impact is maybe bigger at the tier 3 than maybe the tier 4, but yeah.
And speaking of impacts to, I guess, the lower tier events, I do want to sort of bring us back or remind us a little bit of like why this came about. This came about in the first place, like this whole weekly LL thing came about because we've had matters in the past where across PQ season, like a hero goes into PQ season, RTN season very close to the LL threshold, and then they end that season at way above 1,000 points because there wasn't this weekly check-in, right? Starvo and Lexi, I think, were the two biggest culprits of it. Starvo particularly. Starvo was more than 1,500 points before he was actually banned in CC, which is like more than halfway through being LL'd again before he left. So this is to like stop that. So, and I do appreciate that part of it. I do like that during the RTN, during the PQ season thing, and the meta is shifting every now and then, like, someone LL'd during RTN. Well, it was Visrai, right? Visrai LL'd like during the most recent RTN season.
Last week. Yeah, last week it wasn't.
Yeah, and you know, stuff like that. I think to your point, is quite exciting and rewards players for adapting very, very quickly, and it's cool to be like a part of it. But again, that's like the lower tier type event stuff, right? And then when it's like the tier 4 thing, I do feel a little bit like perhaps I wouldn't be opposed if they decide maybe a lock-in date a few weeks before tier 4 event is perhaps warranted, because again, right now it's Zen and it's okay, but if it's something like an Enigma, I'd be as a player, I'd be a little bit anxious. Probably is the best term to put it.
I've got the fix. I think I've just got the fix. Like honestly, I think this is the best fix, and you can debate as to how many weeks before this should happen. Just don't have a battle harden the week before. Like I think just don't do it. And I don't think there's a problem with not having something at a battle hardened level the week before. I mean, even if you like, just have it all 2 weeks before. And if you want to say, well, we'd like to have a calling the weekend before, which I also think is quite a cool thing to do, have a calling the weekend before. Then yeah, to Pankaj's point, have a lock-in date of like, because of Pro Tour and because of like how big this event is, our premier tier 4 event, this is the exception to the rule with our weekly Living Legend leaderboard check, is that we never do a check a week before a tier 4 event.
And it's also, you still get to keep the reason it was there in the first place, right? Which is 100%. You're still doing the weekly stuff in RTN PQ season, because I don't think we've had a case where RTN season just ended and then a week later it's a Pro Tour. Like that doesn't happen.
Yes.
RTN season ends and it's still a few weeks before the Pro Tour, so you still get to have that part of it. You also get to avoid it's a week before and people don't actually know whether they can play their deck at the PT. which is like if their deck is Zen. There's a fair number of people who don't know whether they can play the hero, which I feel for those players, basically. Even as someone who isn't playing, and even as someone who was playing, wouldn't be playing Zen, I still feel for those players, just because it could be another deck, and then it could like affect everyone.
I mean, at the chance of having egg on my face, I feel like if Zen Living Legends is doing those players a favor.
All right. If we have nothing else to talk on that part of it, should we move on
let's do
to
it.
potential meta shifts? Okay. So this is so interesting. We alluded to this earlier, but I think this might be the least impactful LL. We've spoken about how LLs in the past have always caused a big shift in the meta, but that's typically because almost every LL deck we can think of, scratch the almost, every LL deck we can think of was gatekeeping something. Was straight up not allowing a certain deck to play it. You have something to bring up?
I think Briar might be the only potential exception when it did LL. I mean, I'm at one US Nationals, but that was kind of out of the, like, it was a very different type of Briar list, right? It was this like fatigue. So I do agree. I thought just throw it out there, like Briar might be the closest. Every other deck has been a massive impact on the format at the time it hit LL.
That's a very fair point. I actually did forget about Briar, but I think part of it, Briar also had a massive impact because it was taking Rosetta Thorn with her.
Yes.
I was like, so I think that's why that didn't quite register, because yeah, she wasn't gatekeeping anything, but she did still have a big impact from leaving.
Yeah.
Whereas Zen feels like he's not gatekeeping anything. No one's really teching for Zen. It's not like, when Dromai LL'd, she was gatekeeping stuff, and she also gave people a whole bunch of sideboard slots back, right? Yep. People running like Down and Dirty and all these like random poppers to beat Dromai, and Dromai was gatekeeping a whole bunch of stuff. Zen, no one's teching for Zen. You don't have cards in your list where you're like, oh, this is specifically for Zen. You're not bringing a deck to the event because Zen exists. So he's in the perhaps most unique LL spot we've had, where when he leaves, I wonder who is going to feel that he left in terms of deck building and in terms of what hero they can bring, aside from people who play Zen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you hit it right. It doesn't gatekeep anything. Like there's nothing where you're like, oh, I have these cards, or I'm no longer playing these. I mean, there's a couple, I guess, like some of your more on-hit effects or these sorts of things. I don't know, maybe Weakest Link takes a bit of a hit. Like people are going to play this Weakest Link, but maybe not because Enigma's...
Aurora and Enigma are at the top.
Wow.
Like, you still just play Weakest Link.
Enigma, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, cool. So in terms of meta shifts then, just where, I guess, do the Zen players just equally disperse into literally everything else, and then just everything else just get a bump up in percentage? I will point out one interesting thing, though. It does feel like into like Enigma, for example, Zen is favored, and I do think Zen is more favored into Enigma than Aurora is. So there is potentially a little bit of, I don't know, maybe it tends a little bit towards Enigma in terms of increase in representation if Zen allows for the PT.
I mean, I don't know. I don't agree on that point. So I feel like I think Aurora's better.
All right, fair enough.
I do think it comes down to builds, and one thing I will say is that Zen, not so much gatekeeping, but it coming out of the format. One thing that might shift is just what people are considering in terms of where they're leaning. So if I take Enigma for example, right, I think you have a lot of. I think the builds that people are playing in order to tackle Aurora, fairly, like the Venn diagram is pretty massive overlap between what you would also want to play to tackle Zen, I think. Just in terms of like the style of play, the proactiveness, those sorts of things. One thing though is that, for instance, maybe you can get a bit more greedy with playing, what are they called when you pop them? Why do you pop a Herald? Because they have...
Phantasm.
You might be able to get away with playing more Phantasm attacks because, for instance, Aurora just can't play pop as well. Like Lightning presses its popper, because if it starts to like pump a bunch of poppers into the deck, it just can't really play them, right? It's really awkward. So maybe you can get a bit more greedy on that. Maybe we see more Spears of Seriality in Enigmas, things like this, which can also help into Mirror Match, whatever. And on the flip side, I think that's probably a good example of that impact, I think, where Zen is at right now.
And is there... Yeah, I mean, we kind of... I'm like, normally, if you asked me last year, I'd be like, oh, if Zen goes, then Nu gets really hit. Like, you'd be like, oh, I don't want to play Nu anymore because Zen is gone.
But it's already hit.
But the Zen Nu matchup these days isn't even. It's like kind of close to even. So if Zen goes, I don't think Nu gets affected at all either, unless Zen leaving causes a bit more enigmas, and then Nu is a little sadder.
Yeah, this is why I'm just like, this is why I'm like, I don't know why I would play Zen at PT. Like, we're talking about like, oh, what hole does this leave? This powerful Zen deck. Oh, it doesn't really leave that much of a hole. Oh, was it actually that powerful to start with? I mean, yeah, it's pretty powerful, but is it as powerful? I didn't. Yeah, this is just kind of where I come back to Zen. I'm like, yeah, the deck is solid. The deck is good.
Yeah, he feels very much like almost like KO, but even more so like KO. You know how KO was like a 45 into or 255 into everything? There wasn't anything where like, heck yeah, I'm on KO. And there wasn't anything where like, oh man, I'm on KO into this guy. Zen is kind of like even more so that. Except he seems he's like in the 48 to 52 into like everything, is like my take. I know you have thoughts on that. And
I think that's true.
His worst matchup isn't 48. Oh, you think that's right?
Oh, I think it's more like 45, sorry. But yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, he's like even more so occupying the KO spot where if you're the sort of player that likes just always having game into everything, no matter what your hero flips, sort of like the opposite of like the Jarl or like the Florian, where like you're targeting something and you're taking a hit somewhere else. You just prefer to be like, I want to play all my games and I want to like try and skill get my opponent every time. I feel like Zen is a very viable pick for that.
Yeah, I mean, it might be good for Florian. I don't know, like maybe Zen's on like that 55 side against Florian. I've not played that matchup enough, but I've played it a few times, so maybe it's good for Florian. Like we're just talking about kind of for the PT meta. I'll tell you what, it's pretty bad for Dash Inventor Extraordinaire. I think now you have no good matchups in the format, so no reason to play that hero again. I'm just saying that because it's so close to Living Legend. That's the only reason I say that.
Oh, true. Oh my god, I forgot that Dash is almost LL.
940.
Well. Talk about another hero that isn't going to have an impact when she LLs. Well, I guess it's the sort of thing where like, how will she LL, to be honest? Because like it's just like we thought she was gonna go this part. We thought that was like, oh, she might have gone this past RTN season, and just don't think she got any points at all.
No, I don't think so. Not like because Azalea is in that space as well, but Azalea got a few Living Legend points. So yeah, it's funny.
Okay. While we're talking about the mechanologists, actually, do you have thoughts on Dash.io? And this is we are diverging away from the Zen conversation over here.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly done with the Zen conversation. I just like the place it probably has some impact is maybe PQ season. I think because we will have a bit of iteration post London. I think it's going to have more of an impact there. And for instance, if it's legal week 1 versus week 2, like that might feel a little bit different, honestly. And not to say it's not going to have impact. Like Zen is going to have impact next week if it's not legal to play in London. But I think the biggest impact it's going to have is where do people who were going to play Zen go? That's actually what I think the biggest impact is going to be. Like, what do those people play now? Like, is it Aurora? Do they play a different Mystic hero in the form of Enigma? Or do they, like, take a punt and just go completely different? And some of them are like, actually, my backup deck in this instance is like, I'm going to play Dash.io or Fang or something. Like, what are they looking at? Let's start with the first one of those, Dash.io. I mean, it top-aided Battle Hardened in Sao Paulo. So, you know, it's had a result recently, right?
I think it top 8'd either the one that's the Fang one or the Jarl one. Like one of those.
It's the Jarl one. It was the Jarl one. It was the Sao Paulo one. I think the deck is like playable. Your Aurora matchup is actually not that great though. Like I think you're maybe slightly favored, which is not where you want to be. I don't think you can beat Enigma. I think they can so easily fatigue you.
So I agree that you're slightly favored into Aurora. I want to push back a little bit on I don't think you're a dog into Enigma. I think Null Time Zone is a card that not everyone is prepared to play against and can really hose, especially the Mystic heroes.
Yeah.
Because you call in a chi every time, and it turns off the Traverse. It turns off... I mean, Enigma is running on a whole bunch of chi in her deck. It turns that off. And in this meta where everyone's running 12 D-Reacts, and you just know the names of the D-Reacts, obviously, you can also just hose people with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have to call either... Like, you have to call Sink Below or Fate Bassin, right? Because they can just discard the
Shelter.
The Shelter. And honestly, like, as someone who's played a lot of Enigma into Dasho, like, I'm siding out Chi in that matchup because I'm pretty confident I'm just going to fatigue them. So, yeah, I mean, it has some impact, maybe. But I think the matchup is not great. I have played it because I was like, oh, it's Dasho.
I agree it's not great. If I were to play the matchup, I wouldn't want to be on the Dash.io side. But is Dash.io potentially in that spot that we were talking about earlier, where you're favored into the best deck, but and you're unfavored into like the next most represented, but you're not. You still get to play the game, and you're not going to eat lunch.
Yeah, it is, but I think the problem is that you actually I think you need to be a powerful base deck to be able to do that, because you also need to just be able to win other games that you'll play. Like you need to be able to, when your new matchups, we haven't spoken about Arachne Marionette. I don't think it's going to show up that much, but
when you're Florin.
Yeah, when you're Florin, and I don't think you can ever beat
Yeah,
Florin. So
that's not happening.
Yeah, so I think it's just a non-starter, to be honest. The one I'll throw back at you, because you just threw up a replay analysis for the Arsenal Pass patrons on this. Fang, where's Fang's living? Like, because it just won a Battle Hardened 2 weeks ago. We spoke about it a little bit in the pod last week. Is Fang actually this deck that's sitting on the sidelines, ready to surprise everyone? We spoke about it last week. Like, is this going to be the deck that comes in and no one's kind of expecting it, and it's the deck of the tournament? It's kind of like is it the Azuri of the tournament?
I think he has an abysmal Aurora matchup, so definitely not the Azuri of the tournament. Azuri was good into Zen. Fang is not good into Aurora, in my opinion. I think you need to come online by like turn 2 into Aurora for it to be a game. Otherwise, the problem with Fang is that once you make your first fealty, you can never block out. Or you really don't want to block out.
No.
And then the Aurora plays Burn Up Shock.
Yeah, you get screwed.
And then you're really sad. Because what also happens is that suppose they play the Burn Up Shock with the CLV before you make your fealty, and you're like, oh, okay, cool, I can block out and like not lose my free fealty or whatever, right? But then what happens is that your Dynamo doesn't refresh either. And then you're that much worse at blocking out the breakpoint in the following turn. So because this deck isn't allowed to take off turns, and Aurora is sending on hits at you like every turn or every other turn from Burn Up Shocks and CLVs. Also, you're just bad into Arcane. That entire matchup just feels pretty cursed from an entirely theory standpoint. Every off turn you take, you don't get to block with a breakpoint, you lose your fealties. So you just... And then you have no resources to pitch for Arcane. It's just not great. And then your numbers only get as good as theirs once you are online. And before that, your numbers are just strictly worse than theirs.
I agree. Like people were banging down our door in the comments a couple of weeks ago, being like, "It's good into Aurora." I played some games. I don't know how this is ever good into Aurora. Like, if you draw the God Hand, yeah, sure. But if you draw the God Hand, I think you're actually able to beat most things anyway that aren't like the assassins maybe disrupting you, or Yao, for instance. The Yao matchup's so bad. Me and Nick played that. I actually haven't it's the last game I haven't put up from our gameplay series, and actually the game was kind of interesting because I think the Yao list I played was maybe not ideal, and we were both learning the matchup. So I might put it up just as like a learning point, but I haven't published that game because it was maybe it was the least interesting of the games. Yeah. I don't understand the Fang piece. I'm expecting Fang to show up. I've heard that maybe there's a group or two that are actively like planning to and been preparing to play Fang. I don't know what group that is. I just had heard some things. Whether that's true or not, take it with a grain of salt. I don't know.
I'd be very excited to see a Fang do well and a Fang convincingly beat Aurora without just high rolling into triple fealty by turn 2. I'll be very, very interested in that. I have a bit of a hot take about Fang, actually, which is I don't even think his new matchup is that good, as you would expect a dual-wielding warrior to be. Like, Hatchet's Dory and Kasai are very good into new, but that's because they don't have that problem where if they block out, they just lose all their progress, right? Like, Hatchet's, like, your Kasai is like the copper and the gold and everything will still stay around if the new Bonds of Agony UN just completely rips your hand, right? If they go like Bonds, Hiss, CNC, whatever, and just completely nuke your turn. As a Kasai, you're kind of like, okay, cool, I blocked you out, can you do that again? And then when you can't do that again, I'm like, here, I'm just out-valuing you. Whereas Fang is like, oh, okay, I just lost all my fealty and now I need to start all over again. Also, he's just a little bit more fatigable because he just kind of always needs the Draconic React. Otherwise, it actually just doesn't function. Yep. So he is favored into new. I'm not going to say he's not favored into new, but it's just not as good into new as I'd want it to be. And then his Enigma matchup is fine. Like you can play into Enigma, but again, it's just not in a spot where I'm like, not in a spot where I'm like super happy to see like pretty much anything in the format. So except Florin. Okay, he is very good into Florin. Sure. It's incredible against Florin. But then it's like, okay, I wouldn't bring a deck to target Florin.
We're gonna get roasted in the comments again by these Fang enjoyers. Can't wait. We'll see who's right come Pro Tour London time. Any other?
I want to talk about Slippy.
Yeah, sure. Of course Slippy.
You do. I think okay. It's funny because Slippy isn't really my kind of assassin anyway. I prefer like new. I honestly probably prefer Zuri too. Slippy, could Slippy be the Zuri of the format? So we've spoken about how Slippy is favored into Enigma. What do you think of Slippy into Aurora?
I don't think it's very good. I think it's actively... I think maybe the first couple of times you play it, you're like, oh, this matchup might be interesting. And then you learn a bit more about how Slippy plays, and then it's no longer interesting, I think, personally.
Okay. I could see that. I will say, though, Art of Desire Body and Infiltrate, I think, are pretty freaking good cards in that matchup.
Infiltrate's good.
I will say, like, that is...
That's
like,
part of it. Like, if you don't save your equipment for Infiltrate, like, yeah, I agree.
That's their version of, like, their CLVs and their snatches, right, if you will. It's the Art of Desire Body and Infiltrate, which are, absolute houses. But in this era where even Auroras are running some D-Reacts, I could see the Slippy not exactly being super happy. But I do think it is playable. I think the Slippy Aurora matchup is a game to be played and is not a slam dunk for Aurora as, say, Aurora into Fang is.
Yeah, no, I actually think, honestly, I think if Slippy's ever been viable, it's Pro Tour London. Because I think Nu's going to drop right off the map, honestly. I do think that. I think it'd probably be in the top 6 most played decks, but I imagine it's going to be around like maybe 8 to 10% meta representation at most, I think. Maybe 11%, maybe at most. So I think... And I don't think Marionette's showing up. Like, I just don't think people are... unfortunately, sorry, Pankaj, I just don't think it's it for Marionette. Maybe a couple of people play it, right? So I think this is the time to play Slippy. Like, I think, you don't have to worry about these awful assassin mirrors where you have to, like, play around the hero ability. You get to have a really good matchup into Enigma, which may be the second most played. Potentially, if you've played it a lot and people are... maybe not as prepared, this Aurora versus Slippy matchup is like could be potentially close, right? Could be close enough that you'd be comfortable playing it. The one I don't know about is Florian and Zen. I think those matchups, especially if they've got the the wax on, wax off package and just good damage, like I don't know.
I could see this being problematic. The interesting thing about Slippy, something that I always notice in like the playtest games and even on coverage. When they start their turn with bonds, it's just a 1-card 6 go again. Because the opponent always just puts 6 block in front of it. And then you just say, okay, cool, here's my next stealth attack. Which is super, super interesting. You brought up the point about... Oh, damn it. I had it and then just escaped me.
It's about the Zen or...
Oh, the Assassin Mirror.
Yes,
the Assassin Mirrors. It's... Like, yes, the other assassins are a little bit lower, so Slippy's stock goes up. But the other thing I would want to point out, even if you do face against a Nu, the way Nus are built these days with like 12 D-Reacts, I'm not entirely sure how scared you should be about giving them your hero power anyway. You should be a bit nervous that they have 12 D-Reacts and you're an assassin. But the hero power part of it, I think, is less relevant.
It's more Azuri.
The way they're built these days.
It's more Azuri and Marionette. I think against Nu, the problem is they're probably just going to fatigue you as Slippy, honestly.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I think other than that, we've spoken a little bit about Florian. I'm interested to see where people land on that. I think people are going to play Florian. Like, I think it's going to be the deck that's... It reminds me a little bit of, the kind of the KO. I actually wouldn't be surprised if people Zen Living Legends that Zen's move to Florian. Actually, it feels kind of similar in the meta spot. Actually, to me, I'm
still not convinced that Florian is favored into Aurora. I could at least okay, fine. I guess I could see it being like very slightly, like just like
that's
a
where I'm
touch.
That's where I'm at.
Leaning towards Florian, but I don't think it's favored enough. It's not as favored as you are unfavored into Enigma, if that made any sense.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Like suppose you're X percent favored into Aurora, and you are Y percent unfavored into Enigma. I think Y is greater than X by like a good amount.
Oh, interesting. I think it is, but I don't think it's that much. I personally think the Florian on the whole, and there's a lot of different strategies and like lists and different ways people are playing. I think on the whole, it's like maybe 55 favored Florian versus Aurora, and I think it's like about 60 favored for Enigma into Florian. So I think it's like somewhat close, but I think it's not close. To your point, the main thing is I don't think it's close enough, and that is the big point. Like I wouldn't be playing Florian. I don't think there's. Oh, that brings me. We got to tell everyone what decks we'll be playing for. If we at this point we'll be playing for Pro Tour London before we wrap the pod as well. Yep.
Yeah. Any other heroes you want to talk about? Is Prism something we want to talk about at all? Like,
No.
in theory, kind of decent into Aurora.
In theory,
I mean, not even just in theory. I think she is decent into Aurora.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the more that people have played that matchup, it's gone from being like, oh, this is like a 70% for Prism, like, you know, it's almost unlosable, to this is favored for Prism, but not amazing. And then you've got to deal with Enigma, and you've got to try and deal with Florian and Zen, and it's like, actually, you don't have enough. If you had 90 card slots in your deck, I could see Prism being playable for this event. Playable.
That's kind of the story of this meta, right? Where I just feel like everything is like, okay, you build yourself to beat Aurora, and that asks you to put, I guess not in the Prism case, but like in most other cases, that asks you to put 12 D-Reacts in your deck. And then you play against the Enigma, and you're like, oh no, I have 12 D-Reacts in my deck. I've seen some new lists where they have to run Sync Below into Enigma. And that's just like, why? Like, you cannot play that.
And that's why Enigma is so
not
good.
allowed to do that.
And that's why Enigma is so good.
Yeah, it's like the two decks are asking you to do very, very different things. Aurora's like asking you to block her, and Enigma saying convert your full 5-card hand. So, I mean, there's a reason the two of them are at the top, right? And then Zen's kind of like he can sort of do both.
Yeah, and that's why I think Zen is getting some buzz. It's like, oh, he can do both. My viewpoint doesn't do both well enough, but I think that is the reason that he is in that spot, is because it's like, oh, it's the same with Florian. It's like, oh, Florian maybe can. I just think it's not good enough. If I was packing my bag right now, which I'm about to, heading to London, like in my prime deck box ready to go, I'm playing Enigma. Like, that's the deck I'm playing. I just think, obviously, maybe I'm a bit of an Enigma truther and I just keep getting wrapped back in. It is the play style I probably prefer of decks in the format right now. That's not something maybe like a Jarl or maybe even like a Marionette. I quite enjoy that play style. But I think, I think Enigma is just so good. I think that the reason I think it's so good is because I think you're actually like maybe slightly unfavored into. I honestly think it's only like a 45-55 into Aurora. I think with builds people have got at the moment, and with like personally what I would play with my Enigma build, and then which I think is a lot of similar to. I honestly think like the Enigma build that I'd play is probably 75 cards, the same as like what most people are going to play in a lot of teams for Enigma if they land on it. And then I think you just pit it. People have to play all these defense reactions. They're ticking for Aurora, and it just makes your matchups, like, you take matchups that were previously maybe like 50-50. Like, I'll even use the Zen one, right? I think Zen has previously been a bad matchup for Enigma, like a 60%er, like, you know, for Zen. And I now think it's like really close to 50-50, because like they go like, oh, like you can't afford to have like extra poppers, or you have these defense reactions that just have to sit in your sideboard, and you don't have extra slots for other cards. Like, so you have these like kind of average cards in the matchup that you'd much prefer with active cards into the Enigma matchup. You've got, Florian on that side doing something. You've got honestly, for Worlds in Osaka, like Nu actually felt like it was really close. If not, honestly, I felt it was Nu favored into the CYB Enigma decks, honestly. And now it's like, oh, that matchup's a joke. Like, that matchup's actually a joke if people are playing these builds that are ticked for Aurora.
I definitely agree with you on the Aurora Enigma side of things, where it is not as favored for Enigma as you would have thought, like in theory or on the surface. I think it is very much a game to be played, and Aurora does need to work for it, and also needs to know how to play the game. Like, how to play that matchup, needs experience in it. Also agree with you on the Zen side of things, where Zen, again, like similar to the Aurora, where the Zen and Aurora are favored, but not by that much because of how these decks are built. As we talk about how the way these decks are built, now Enigma is also packing like 12D reacts. So I want your thoughts on the Enigma mirror, as someone who might take Enigma. It did sound like one of the most miserable mirrors right now, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not my favorite mirror to play. I will say though, like, I think the more people, obviously, the more people do a tick for Aurora, the less they can fit cards for the mirror. I will say, not a fan of the 12D Rex. I would be playing. I'm not playing 12D Rex in my. I actually think that makes your matchup into Aurora worse. So I will not be playing 12D. I would not be playing 12D Rex in my Enigma deck. That's for sure. I think people have moved to things like that. All you got, not just in Enigma, but in a lot of decks. And I think it's kind of whatever, honestly. Like, that's not the plan I would be on to try. And I think people are going to get in this trap if they're playing these decks to beat Aurora, and actually what they're going to find is that their deck was better versus Aurora before, when they actually had an active game plan, because they will just here's an Arc Lightning turn that also has a Skyward Serenade, and all of a sudden I'm just outvaluing you and I'm out damaging you, and you were planning to block me out, but actually, as it turns out, on this Channel Lightning Valley turn or this Burn Up Shock turn, you just don't have the D-React. And this, you drew 3 last turn, but you have 0 in this hand, and you lose. Like, I just don't think it's the way. So, yeah, personally. And also, I think that means that you become better in the mirror, and I do think there's going to be a chunk of Enigma, because it means you can play, like, your full complement of Waxing Spectres, or you can fit in some Waning Vengeance and things like that, these cards that are good in the mirror, so...
You are still somewhat defensively slanted, right? As the Enigma like for the Aurora matchup.
You're mid range.
Okay,
you're like mid range, I would say. Like you're trying to do the best thing you can with your hands. Like, and you're hoping that, you know, as the Auroras, that your hands line up favorably for you as opposed to the other way. So like, oh, they do have the Burn Off Shock, or they do have the CLV this turn. Either I've been sitting on this D-React in Arsenal, or I've drawn the D-React in this 4-card hand, and I'll be able to stop the second turn of the Channel Lightning Valley versus their 4-card. I've stopped that, and now they're coming in with a kind of setup turn of like 2 to 3 cards, Arsenal a card, and I do have the Phantasmaclasm this turn, you know, to disrupt that piece, or I do have the other disruption piece that I'm relying on. I do have the weakest link here. You know, I've got my Spares of Cerealia into weakest link on this turn to present good damage and disrupt them. That's the game, really. It's a very much just a trying to find the right hands, trying to craft the right game state, and hope things line up a little bit for both sides. Honestly, it's both sides.
You hope your D-React doesn't line up with their Exude Confidence, for sure.
Or if it does,
Spears,
I've got my attack action to pair with it, right?
Spears is a very good card in the mirror. I definitely agree with that.
Oh, it's I think it might be the best card in the mirror.
So the hero I would bring, and I did caveat this with, if I was playing for this event, I would have started getting more reps into this hero. So like, if I was literally, if you told me next week for some reason I'm not casting and I'm playing, then I don't know what I'd be like. I guess I probably just played new just because it's the one I'm most reps in. But if I was playing, if I had the lens of a player since a few weeks ago, what I would have prepared and what I would love to bring is Vincent.
Oh wow, okay, well, that's right then. I mean, is it okay? I don't know. I thought you were about to say Verdance, and I was going to be like, oh come on, man.
No, I was not going to say, but I think Vincent is the closest to like the Azuri of this meta, as we keep talking about it. I think Vincent is slightly favored into Aurora, and with the correct game plan and with understanding matchup correctly, I think you are fine into Enigma as well.
I don't know what to say.
I mean, you're clearly skeptical, and you don't think Vincent beats Enigma ever, but...
Oh, I know. I think Vincent can... I think Vincent can beat Enigma. I think Vincent is favored into Aurora, where Aurora has not been preparing to play that matchup, is what I would say. That's been my experience.
Okay.
So
I will say the Vincent Aurora matchup was more favored for Vincent a few weeks ago than it is now. As you said, Auroras are preparing a little bit more, but I still
interested in what the Teleshot data is.
I wouldn't call it Aurora favored by any means. I mean, I would still call it Vincent favored, is I guess my point.
Interesting. I'm actually interested what Teleshot stats are showing. Not the the be all and end all, but I do find sometimes when I'm like a little bit unsure about things, I just kind of like go and see. I mean, it's showing it's 54% versus Aurora month to date in games. Vincent favored versus Aurora, which is interesting. So, and it has a pretty solid.
What does it say? What does it say for Vincent Enigma?
Vincent Enigma is 47% for Vincent. Yeah, I think that matchup is winnable. One thing I'll say about Vincent right now is I do think that the builds people are rolling out with, particularly like Enigma and some of these other decks, it's not particularly healthy for Vincent, I would say, though. It seems to be like the splash of the Aurora hate on Vincent in some ways is not necessarily ideal.
Are you talking about like the defense reactions? Because I think like defense reactions into Vincent can actually be really, really awkward. So
not so much the defense reactions, but more the viewpoint I just had of like, yes, you play some defense reactions, but you also play like good disruptive damage pieces, because sometimes you just need to, when you get your spots versus Vincent, you need to be able to deal with damage. Like you need to be able to be like, yep, I'm coming in with hits here. I'm going to chunk your life total down, because if you give Vincent extra turns, like they will punish you massively for them. Like they will
kill you.
Yeah. So you can't give them those turns. So I do agree on that part.
Yeah. And then my backup pick would be Verdance.
God damn
it. You stopped me the first time, but you didn't see this one coming. Anyway.
All right. Anything else to add before we wrap it up, Pankaj?
No, I think we've said our piece. I'm super excited to be in London, and I guess a bit of a spoiler, we will be recording our next pod in London live, so look out for that one for sure.
Yeah, next time you'll be hearing from us will be in London. That's true. Yeah, well, it's come around so fast. Well, that has been episode 207 of Arsenal Pass. There's some uncertainty about Zen, some unzentainty. Is that how we're saying it? Unzentainty? Unzentainty, sure. Shout out to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. And make sure you go check out some additional content there, including Pankaj rolling with Fang in a replay analysis. Me sharing my deck tech for Jarl is up there as well, ahead of ProQuest season. And until next time, we will see you from the United Kingdom.